A German Shepherd stood outside Callahan Hardware in Green Bay, Wisconsin at 5:47 p.m. on December 29, 2019, her voice nearly gone from barking. She was soaking wet, ribs visible through matted fur, paws bleeding on the frozen sidewalk. This was her 47th attempt to find help. 4 newborn puppies were drowning in rising floodwater 2 miles away. She had run through the streets all day, barking at strangers, trying to lead them back. 46 people had said no, shooing her away, threatening her, ignoring her desperate pleas. One man would finally stop. But not because he was kinder than the others. What happened next would save more than 5 lives. It would transform an entire city, expose devastating truths, and prove that sometimes salvation comes from the most broken places. But first you need to understand how a dog learned that humans were monsters, and then had to trust one anyway. The number 47 would haunt them all. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. Green Bay, Wisconsin had seen better days. The Broadway district, once a thriving industrial hub, had declined steadily since the 2008 recession. Warehouses stood empty, their broken windows like vacant eyes watching the neighborhood decay. By 2019, 18% of the district's senior residents lived below the poverty line. The winter that year was the coldest in 3 decades, with snow accumulating in mountains that refused to melt. Sal's salvage yard sat at 2847 Ashland Avenue, a sprawling maze of rusted metal and abandoned machinery in a natural depression that city planners had designated a flood zone decades ago. Nobody paid attention to the faded warning signs anymore. Nobody paid attention to much of anything in this forgotten corner of the city. Robert Callahan, everyone called him Bob, was 67 years old and looked every day of it. Gray hair, weathered hands that trembled slightly, the kind of weariness that comes from carrying grief too long. He'd worked as a carpenter for 45 years, building things with those steady hands. Now they just shook. 3 years ago, he'd watched his wife Mary die of cancer in their bedroom because they couldn't afford the morphine that would have eased her pain. The ambulance had arrived 47 minutes after his 911 call. Mary had been gone for 12 minutes by then. Bob sold their house to pay the $147,000 in medical bills that insurance wouldn't cover. He sold Callahan Sons Hardware, the store his father had founded in 1952. Now he lived in apartment 4B at Riverside Senior Living, managing the hardware store for its new corporate owners, surviving on $1,847 a month in Social Security. In his nightstand drawer, a loaded .38 revolver had been waiting since December 15th. He'd written his will, said goodbye to everything. December 29th would be the day. Marcus Brennan was 37 and drowning in a different way. He'd once been a successful contractor with a wife named Jennifer and a daughter named Lily. Then Jennifer was diagnosed with leukemia in 2017. Then she left him, filed for divorce, claimed domestic violence, took Lily and disappeared. Marcus never knew Jennifer left to spare him the medical debt that had destroyed Bob. Never knew she died alone in hospice 8 months later. Never knew Lily wasn't biologically his, though he'd loved her as his own since she was born in 2007. He just knew he'd lost everything. The $89,000 in debt, the failing business, the daughter who refused to see him, the warehouse he could barely afford to rent at 2847 Ashland Avenue, Warehouse 47, and Sasha, a 6-year-old German Shepherd who'd arrived at his door 3 years ago, eager and trusting. She'd become the target for every ounce of rage and grief Marcus couldn't control. The chain around her neck, the beatings, the starvation. 3 years of systematic torture in that concrete room. Until March 15, 2019, when survival instinct finally overcame learned helplessness and she ran. The room in Warehouse 47 had no windows. One fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on concrete walls. A 6-foot chain bolted to a pipe kept Sasha from reaching the water bowl when she stretched the wrong direction. This had been her world since 2016. She'd arrived as a 3-year-old, tail wagging, eager to please. Marcus had wanted a guard dog. Instead, he got something to break. The first beating came after Jennifer left. Sasha had wagged her tail, happy to see Marcus return home. He'd kicked her for being happy when he wasn't. The pattern established itself quickly. Food withheld for days, blows from boots and fists and pipes, isolation in that windowless room. Wednesday nights were worst. Marcus would visit the bar where he'd proposed to Jennifer, then return home with whiskey on his breath and rage in his hands. Even after 3 years, Sasha's tail would wag tentatively when Marcus approached, some deep instinct still hoping for kindness. Her body would press low in submission, amber eyes searching his face for mercy that never came. In February 2019, someone broke into the warehouse. Nothing was stolen, but the violation sent Marcus into a fury. He beat Sasha unconscious with a pipe and left her for 3 days without checking. Without water, the temperature dropped to 15 degrees. When she finally dragged herself upright, the water bowl was frozen solid. On the wall behind her chain, 3 other mounting bolts were visible. Different heights, different-sized dogs. Sasha was not the first. Wednesday, March 13th, Marcus came home drunker than usual. The whiskey bottle in his hand was nearly empty. He raised the pipe high. For the first time in 3 years, Sasha didn't cower. The chain, in Marcus's deteriorating state, hadn't been secured properly. When she bolted past him, it slipped free. The side door, never properly locked anymore, burst open under her weight. Marcus stumbled after her, shouting, but his heart wasn't in the chase. Part of him wanted her gone. Part of him hated what he'd become. Sasha ran. Her paws bled on frozen March sidewalks. She didn't stop for 2 miles. Didn't look back until she collapsed behind a dumpster on the east side, lungs burning, legs trembling. Free. Finally free. But freedom brought new terrors. Every human was a potential Marcus. Hunger was constant. She learned to raid dumpsters behind restaurants in the hours before dawn when fewer people were around. The McDonald's on Washington Street became a regular stop. She slept in abandoned buildings, never staying long enough to feel safe, always moving. Spring became summer. New scars accumulated. A raccoon tore her left ear fighting over scraps. A car clipped her, worsening the limp in her right hind leg. July's heat left her panting with no access to clean water. In May, behind a Chinese restaurant, she encountered another German shepherd, male, battle-scarred but not aggressive. For 3 days they traveled together, sharing food and warmth. Then he vanished as suddenly as he'd appeared. Sasha was alone again. By June, her belly was swelling. The nesting instinct grew overwhelming. She needed shelter, safety, a place to bring new life into a world that had shown her mostly cruelty. Sal's salvage yard offered a hollow created by collapsed corrugated metal leaning against a concrete barrier. Hidden behind mountains of old tires barely large enough for her swollen body, exposed to wind and weather. But it was all she had. She lined it with newspapers, cardboard, a moldy blanket pulled from a dumpster. Every instinct screamed this wasn't safe enough. She had no choice. November 23rd arrived with the season's first snow falling soft and silent. At 11 p.m., labor began. Pain, worse than any beating, worse than hunger, worse than cold, her body racked with contractions as she struggled alone in the dark. The first puppy came at midnight. Instinct guided her, cleaning the tiny creature with her tongue, stimulating its breathing, nudging it toward her belly where it latched on and nursed. An hour later, a second puppy, then a third, then a fourth. By dawn, 4 puppies lay against her, 3 males and 1 female, the smallest of the litter. Their eyes were sealed shut. They were completely helpless, completely dependent on her for everything. Looking down at them, feeling their warmth, hearing their soft sounds of contentment, Sasha felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Love, purpose, a reason to keep fighting. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, but her body produced milk. She hadn't slept, but she stayed alert, ears swiveling at every sound, ready to protect these vulnerable lives with her own. The female puppy, the fragile one, worried her most. While her brothers grew stronger, she remained weak, her cries softer, her nursing less vigorous. Sasha would spend extra time cleaning her, encouraging her, willing her to survive. December came. Green Bay's legendary winter showed no mercy. The first week of December, Sasha hadn't eaten in 3 days, but somehow her body produced milk. She left the puppies only 15 to 20 minutes at a time, returning with scraps that were never enough. Temperatures dropped to 10 degrees at night. The puppies' eyes remained closed, making them even more vulnerable. Sasha curled around them constantly, her body the only barrier between them and the killing cold. By the second week, Hope, the smallest female, wasn't nursing well. Sasha spent extra time encouraging her, licking her, willing her to be strong. Snow accumulated 18 inches deep in the salvage yard. Wind found every gap in their hollow shelter. The corrugated metal offered less protection with each passing day. The third week brought a small joy. The puppies' eyes opened. They began exploring their tiny world on unsteady legs, playfighting with gentle growls that made Sasha's heart swell despite everything. But food grew scarcer as restaurants closed for the holidays. Sasha's ribs showed again through her fur. Christmas week arrived. The city went quiet. Dumpsters were locked or empty. Temperature plummeted to a record low of 5 degrees. Sasha shivered through the nights, unable to sleep, watching over her babies. On December 26th, Hope stopped crying, a terrifying sign. Sasha licked her desperately, keeping her warm, keeping her alive. Then the weather changed. December 27th dawned with something unprecedented. The temperature jumped from 15 degrees to 45 degrees in a matter of hours. Instead of snow, rain began falling. Meteorologists on a television in a nearby garage warned of rapid melting causing flooding in low-lying areas within 48 hours. Businesses in the flood zone began sandbagging. Sal's salvage yard, abandoned and forgotten, went unnoticed. By afternoon, puddles formed. Sasha tried moving the puppies to higher ground, a stack of wooden pallets nearby. Water seeped into their hollow from all sides. The puppies cried, cold and wet and hungry. Evening brought heavier rain. Temperature held steady at 40 degrees, the worst possible scenario. Mountains of accumulated snow melted rapidly. The salvage yard, built in a natural depression, became a catch basin for runoff from the entire neighborhood. Water rose to 2 inches deep around the pallets. Through the night, Sasha couldn't sleep. She paced, whining, trying to move the puppies one at a time. But where? The entire yard was flooding. She returned to find water reaching their bellies. Hope had stopped moving, her tiny body succumbing to hypothermia. Sasha licked frantically until the puppy gasped and whimpered weakly. By morning of December 28th, water stood 12 inches deep. The pallets floated slightly. Rain continued without mercy. Sasha realized with bone-deep certainty they would all drown by nightfall. The impossible choice confronted her. Stay and watch them die. Try to carry all 4 through dangerous terrain, impossible, or leave to find help, betraying every mothering instinct she possessed, trusting the humans who had given her nothing but pain. At 9:47 a.m., Hope stopped breathing. Just for a moment, Sasha licked until she gasped back to life, water still rising. No more time. Sasha barked once, the first bark in 9 months. She touched her nose to each puppy, lingering longest on Hope. Then she ran. The gas station came first, at 10:15 a.m. A woman in a blue parka pumped gas. Sasha barked, urgent and desperate, trying to lead her back. The woman shouted, "Get away from my car!" When Sasha moved closer, the woman kicked at her and drove off. A man in a suit ignored her completely. A teenager filmed her on his phone, laughing. "This dog is crazy." An elderly woman looked frightened and called animal control. A delivery driver actually kicked Sasha, making her yelp and dodge. A mother with a child screamed, "Stay away from my baby!" A construction worker threw his coffee cup at her. By 11 a.m., Sasha had been rejected 10 times. Her voice was getting hoarse. Her paws bled from running on frozen sidewalk. But the puppies were drowning. She kept trying. McDonald's, CVS, the strip mall. The pattern repeated at every stop. Some people looked sympathetic, but walked away. "Can't help, sorry." Most ignored her or threatened to call police. One elderly man actually cried as he walked away, but he still walked away. Someone offered food. Sasha refused, tried to lead them back. They shrugged and left. By 2 p.m., she'd been rejected 25 times. Her bark had become a whimper. Still, she tried. Every person she saw was a chance. Every rejection drove the desperation deeper. 3 p.m., 4 p.m. 40 rejections. Sasha was exhausted, limping badly, barely able to make sound. But somewhere, 4 puppies were underwater or dying of cold. She couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. At 5:30 p.m., as winter darkness fell, she'd been rejected 46 times. Her voice was nearly gone. Her paws left bloody prints on the sidewalk. She could barely stand. Callahan Hardware stood on the corner, warm light spilling from its windows. Sasha sat outside and barked, a hoarse, broken sound that was barely audible. She was about to give up, about to accept that she'd failed, that her babies would die, that the world was as cruel as she'd always known it to be. At 5:47 p.m., the door opened. A gray-haired man stepped out, irritation on his weathered face. He'd come to tell her to shut up so he could go home and die in peace. In his coat pocket, a loaded gun waited. Robert Callahan looked at Sasha. Sasha looked at Robert Callahan. In her amber eyes, he saw something that stopped him cold. Not aggression, not emptiness, desperate, profound intelligence, and a plea that reminded him of another pair of eyes he'd failed to save. His hand moved toward the gun in his pocket, then stopped. "You're trying to show me something," he said quietly. Sasha barked differently, urgent, not frantic. She took several steps away, looked back. Bob thought, "What difference does it make? I'm dead tonight anyway." "All right," he said, "show me." Bob stepped back inside briefly. "Tom, lock up. I'm checking on something." His assistant looked confused, but nodded. Bob followed Sasha down the darkening street, his hand still touching the gun in his pocket out of habit, the gun he'd planned to use in a few hours. They walked for 10 minutes through streets Bob barely recognized anymore, though he'd lived here his whole life. Other pedestrians stared at the old man following a bedraggled dog. Bob didn't care. Nothing had mattered for 3 years. Why start caring about appearances now? Mary would have called him a fool. The thought almost made him smile, almost. Sasha kept checking to make sure he followed, her desperation evident in every limping step. They arrived at Sal's salvage yard at 6:05 p.m. The fence had partially collapsed. Water was everywhere. Bob's boots were immediately soaked. The sun had set. Darkness was falling fast. Bob hesitated at the entrance. This was insane. Following a stray dog into a flooded junkyard as night fell. But something in Sasha's eyes had reminded him of Mary in that hospital bed, begging him wordlessly to save her. He couldn't save Mary. Maybe he could save whatever this dog was so desperate to protect. Sasha moved quickly now, navigating the treacherous terrain with urgent whining. Bob stumbled over debris, nearly turned back. Then he heard it, faint but unmistakable. Puppies crying. "Oh my God," he whispered. He pushed through the last barrier of twisted metal. The scene before him at 6:12 p.m. stopped his heart. 4 tiny puppies, huddled on a piece of floating cardboard, shivering so violently he could see it from 10 feet away. Water surrounded them, rising visibly. The smallest one, a female, wasn't moving at all. Sasha rushed to them immediately, licking frantically, looking back at Bob with eyes that said everything. "Please, I can't do this alone. Please help them." Bob didn't think. He pulled off his winter coat, the expensive one he'd bought before Mary got sick, and waded into the water. It reached his waist, shockingly cold. He scooped the puppies into his coat, cradling them against his chest. The smallest one wasn't breathing. His hands, which had trembled with grief and age for 3 years, suddenly became steady. He rubbed the tiny puppy gently, the way he'd once helped a newborn kitten when he was a boy, 50 years ago. "Come on, little one. Come on." 10 seconds passed. It felt like an eternity. The puppy gasped, cried weakly. Bob felt tears on his face for the first time since Mary's funeral. Sasha pressed against his leg. No fear now, only desperate hope. Bob looked down at her. "I got them, Mama. I got them." He started back toward the entrance, moving as quickly as he dared with his precious cargo. Sasha followed, her limp more pronounced now that adrenaline was wearing off. Bob could see how much pain she was in, how exhausted. She'd probably been running all day. At 6:25 p.m., standing by his truck, Bob pulled out his phone and called the only veterinarian he knew. "Maggie, it's Bob Callahan." There was a pause. Dr. Margaret Walsh hadn't heard from Bob in 2 years, not since shortly after Mary died. "Bob, are you—" "I need help. Emergency, mother dog and 4 puppies. Severe hypothermia, possible starvation. Can you meet me at the clinic? I'll be there in 10 minutes. She didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. Later, Bob would learn that Maggie had been worried about him for months, had heard through mutual friends that he'd become isolated, unreachable. She was relieved just to hear his voice. Bob lifted Sasha into the truck. She was too weak to jump. He placed the puppies, still wrapped in his coat, on the seat beside her. She immediately curled around them, nose buried in the fabric, protecting them even now. During the drive to East Side Animal Hospital, Bob kept glancing over. Sasha was watching him with an expression he recognized. Kaiser, his childhood dog, had looked at him like that. Trust, gratitude, hope. "You did good, Mama," Bob said quietly. "You saved them. You saved all of us." East Side Animal Hospital's lights were on when they arrived at 6:45 p.m. Dr. Walsh, a woman in her mid-50s with kind eyes and capable hands, met them at the door. She took one look at Sasha and the puppies and immediately ushered them into the examination room. The next 2 hours were a blur of activity. Dr. Walsh worked with practiced efficiency, her assistant helping as they assessed each animal. The 3 male puppies, malnourished and hypothermic but responsive, would survive with proper care. Their body temperatures were dangerously low, but climbing with heat lamps and warm fluids, the female puppy, the smallest one, was critical. Her body temperature was 94 degrees when it should have been 101 to 102. She showed signs of pneumonia. Her response to stimuli was minimal. "The next 48 hours will be crucial," Dr. Walsh said quietly. Then she examined Sasha. The more she looked, the quieter she became. Finally, she asked Bob to follow her to her office, leaving her assistant to monitor the puppies. "Bob," she said carefully, "this dog has been through hell. These injuries—" She pulled up X-rays on her computer screen. "See these fractures? They healed wrong because they were never treated. This scarring pattern is consistent with repeated beatings over an extended period. Her teeth are worn down, probably from chewing on chains. And psychologically," she paused, "this level of trauma doesn't happen overnight. This is years of systematic abuse." Bob felt rage kindle in his chest, hot and fierce. He hadn't felt anything this strongly since Mary died. "Will she be okay? Physically? With time and proper care, yes. Emotionally?" Maggie looked through the window at Sasha, who was still watching the puppies despite her obvious exhaustion. "That'll take longer. Maybe forever. The fact that she survived, that she kept those puppies alive through this weather and those conditions. Bob, in 30 years of veterinary medicine, I've never seen anything like it." Bob made his decision in that moment. "I want to foster her and the puppies until they're adoptable." Maggie smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from anyone in months. "I was hoping you'd say that." Then reality crashed back. Bob's hand went to his empty pocket. The coat with his wallet was wrapped around Puppies. "Maggie, I need to be honest with you. I can't afford this." She waited. "I lost the house paying Mary's medical bills. The store, too. I'm living on Social Security now, $1,847 a month. This first week of treatment—" He'd seen the equipment, the medications, the intensive care. "I'm guessing $4,000 or $5,000. I have $340 in my checking account." Maggie didn't hesitate. "Bob, I'm not letting these animals die because of money. I'll bill you $50 a month, forever if I have to." Bob felt tears again. Twice in one night. Unprecedented. "Maggie, not negotiable." The clinic door opened. Tom, Bob's assistant, stood there. He'd apparently followed them. "I'll pay for it." Bob stared. "Tom, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." Tom walked closer, and in the fluorescent light, Bob saw something in the young man's face, something familiar. "Dad, it's me. It's Tommy." The world tilted. Bob grabbed the desk for support. Tommy, his son, his and Mary's adopted son, who'd come to them from foster care at 15, who'd left at 19 during Mary's cancer treatment, who'd disappeared 6 years ago without a word. "I ran away when you needed me most," Tom said, his voice breaking. "I couldn't watch Mom die. I was a coward. I've been back 3 months working at the store trying to find the courage to tell you who I was." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This is the education fund. The money you and Mom saved for my college, $8,500. I never touched it. I've been saving to give it back." Bob couldn't speak, couldn't move. "I saw you following that dog," Tom continued. "I followed you. I can't let you face this alone again." "Not again." Bob crossed the distance between them and pulled his son into an embrace. They both cried. Sasha, watching from her kennel, whimpered softly, the sound of recognition, of understanding what reunion meant. At 11 p.m., Bob brought 3 puppies and Sasha home to apartment 4B at Riverside Senior Living. The smallest puppy remained hospitalized, fighting for her life. Tom helped set up a large pen in Bob's living room with heating pads, blankets, food, and water. Bob's apartment was exactly as depressing as it sounded. Small, one-bedroom, sparse furniture, everything frozen in time since Mary died. Photos of her covered every surface, like a shrine. The bedroom they'd shared for 30 years sat closed, untouched. Sasha wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. She stood guard over the 3 puppies, shaking constantly. Warmth, food, safety, all of it was foreign, incomprehensible. She expected betrayal because betrayal was all she'd ever known. Bob sat on the floor near the pen, not too close, respecting her space. He talked to her softly. "I'm not going to hurt you, or them. You're safe now." Tom had gone home, promising to return in the morning. Bob called the hospital at midnight. Hope? He'd started thinking of the smallest puppy as Hope, was stable but critical. He called again at 2 a.m., still fighting. At 3:47 a.m., Bob fell asleep on the couch, exhausted beyond measure. He woke to a sensation he couldn't immediately identify. Sasha stood beside the couch, her nose inches from his face. Bob froze, afraid any movement would startle her. Slowly, carefully, Sasha placed her head on the edge of the couch, not demanding anything, not aggressive, just close, just present. Bob extended his hand with glacial slowness. Sasha sniffed it, her entire body tense and ready to bolt. Bob didn't grab, didn't force, just waited. After what felt like hours, Sasha's tail gave one small, tentative wag. Bob felt tears on his cheeks for the 3rd time that night. "Good girl, Sasha. Good girl." He reached carefully to check her collar, looking for any identification. Hidden under matted fur, he found an old scratch tag, Sasha, and an address. 2847 Ashland Avenue, Green Bay, WI 54304. Warehouse 47. The same industrial district he'd just walked through. The number? 47. Bob lay awake the rest of the night, pieces connecting in his mind. Mary had died 12 minutes before the ambulance arrived, 47 minutes after his call. This dog had been at the 47th stop on her desperate journey. The warehouse address ended in 47. He'd found her at 5:47 p.m. At 6 a.m. on December 29th, as weak winter light filtered through his windows, Bob found the gun in his coat pocket. He'd completely forgotten about it. For the first time in 3 years, he'd gone several hours without thinking about death. He looked at the gun for a long time, then at Sasha, sleeping near the puppies. He removed the bullets and put them in one drawer, put the gun in another drawer. Didn't throw them away. He wasn't ready for that, but separated them. "Maybe," he said to the empty room, "maybe I can wait until the puppies are adopted. Just until then." By 9 a.m. he'd made another decision. He called the Green Bay Police Department and asked for someone who handled animal cruelty cases. Detective Sarah Morrison called him back within 20 minutes. "Mr. Callahan, I understand you have information about animal abuse." Bob sent her photos of Sasha's injuries and the address from her tag. He explained what Dr. Walsh had found, the old fractures, the pattern of systematic abuse, the years of suffering. "We've had complaints about that warehouse before," Detective Morrison said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "We checked it 2 years ago after an anonymous tip. The owner, Marcus Brennan, had apparently moved the dog before we arrived. He claimed he'd never owned a dog. We had no evidence to contradict him." "Can you get a warrant now?" "With this evidence, absolutely. I'll have it by end of day." Over the next several days, Bob and Tom fell into a routine. They cared for the 3 puppies at home, monitored Sasha's slow adjustment to safety, and called the hospital every few hours for updates on Hope. The tiny puppy was fighting, slowly improving, but still critical. Sasha began trusting Bob more each day, though sudden movements still made her flinch. Tom proved himself invaluable, patient and gentle with the animals, gradually rebuilding the relationship with his father that he'd abandoned 6 years ago. On New Year's Eve, Bob remained sober for the first time since Mary's death. He sat with Tom, Sasha, and the 3 puppies, watching the ball drop on television, thinking about second chances, about how 47 rejections had led to 1 acceptance, about how a dog's refusal to give up had saved more than just puppies. On January 2nd, Detective Morrison called with an update. "We've been investigating the warehouse ownership. Marcus Brennan doesn't own it. He rents from a woman named Helen Morrison. No relation to me," she added quickly. "Helen is 70 years old, a widow. She's owned that warehouse since 1985. Did she know about the dog? We interviewed her this morning. She admitted she suspected something was wrong but didn't report it because Marcus always paid rent on time and she needed the income. After her husband died, that rental income became her primary source of support." Bob felt conflicted. He understood desperate poverty. But choosing money over an animal's suffering? What happens to her? She's being charged as an accessory. Could face jail time, will definitely face a lawsuit. She could lose the warehouse, her savings, everything. The news left Bob unsettled. Helen Morrison was 70, a widow, dependent on that income to survive, not unlike his own situation. Where was the line between victim and enabler? He didn't know. On January 3rd, police executed the search warrant on Warehouse 47. Detective Morrison called Bob that evening to tell him what they'd found. The room where Sasha had been kept still had the chain attached to the wall, 6 feet long, bolted into concrete. The floor was stained with old blood and waste. Empty food bowls sat in the corner, one filled with frozen, moldy water. The temperature inside was 40 degrees, no heating, but what made Detective Morrison's voice shake with rage were the other mounting bolts in the wall, 3 of them at different heights suggesting different-sized dogs. "Marcus claims they were from the previous tenant," she said, "but records show he was the first tenant when the warehouse was converted to rental units 8 years ago. We think there were other dogs before Sasha. They all disappeared." Bob felt sick. "Where are they now?" "We don't know. No bodies found on the property, but—" She didn't need to finish. The implications were clear. "What about Marcus? We arrested him this afternoon. He's being charged with multiple counts of felony animal cruelty. If we can prove the other dogs existed and what happened to them, more charges will follow." "What was he like when you arrested him?" "Broken," Morrison said quietly. "Completely broken. Didn't resist. Barely spoke. Just kept saying, 'I know what I did.'" That evening, Detective Morrison came to Bob's apartment to take additional photographs of Sasha's injuries for evidence. She also brought information about what they'd found in Marcus's filing cabinet: medical records for Jennifer Brennan, Marcus's ex-wife, leukemia diagnosis, 2017, divorce papers filed by Jennifer, citing domestic violence, letters from a child named Lily, refusing to see Marcus. 12 letters over 2 years, each one breaking Bob's heart a little more. Photos of Jennifer and Lily, torn and taped back together repeatedly, a physical manifestation of obsession and grief. Jennifer's obituary, dated May 2018. She died in hospice, 8 months after leaving Marcus. The obituary mentioned she was survived by her daughter Lily and her sister Patricia. No mention of Marcus. And Lily's birth certificate, with a devastating detail: the father was originally listed as unknown, later amended through legal adoption to Marcus Brennan. "Jennifer didn't leave because of his violence," Detective Morrison said softly. "The violence was real, but that's not why she left. She had terminal cancer and didn't want Marcus to go bankrupt trying to save her. Just like—" She stopped. "Just like what happened to me," Bob finished. She died alone to spare him the debt. And Lily doesn't know Marcus isn't her biological father. She just knows her mother left him, then died. She refuses contact with Marcus because in her 12-year-old mind he was mean to her mother and drove her away. Bob sat down heavily. So he lost his wife while trying to respect her wishes not to contact her. Lost his daughter, who he loved but wasn't biologically his. Lost his business trying to pay medical bills. Lost everything. And Sasha became the target for all that rage and grief, Morrison concluded. Bob looked at Sasha, sleeping peacefully now near the puppies. Hurt people, he said quietly, echoing something Mary used to say. But that doesn't make it okay. No, Detective Morrison agreed. It doesn't. The trial was set for March 15th. Marcus remained in custody, unable to make bail. Helen Morrison faced her own charges. And in apartment 4B, Bob began the slow process of healing, both for Sasha and for himself. On January 5th, Dr. Walsh called with news that made Bob cry for the 4th time that week. Hope is stable enough to come home. Dr. Walsh drove Hope to Bob's apartment herself on January 5th at 2 p.m. When she opened the carrier, Sasha ran across the room, the fastest Bob had seen her move since the rescue. She licked Hope from head to toe, whining with joy and relief, checking every inch of her smallest puppy. The 3 male puppies tumbled over themselves to reach their sister, creating a wiggling pile of black and tan fur. It was the first time all 4 puppies had been together since Bob pulled them from that flooded salvage yard. Sasha's expression, exhaustion, relief, pure maternal love, made Bob's chest tight. Tom stood in the corner with his phone, capturing the moment. The photograph he took was simple but powerful. Sasha surrounded by all 4 of her puppies, looking at the camera with eyes that had seen hell and somehow found their way back. He posted it to the hardware store's Facebook page that evening with a caption he'd written 3 times before getting it right. This is Sasha. She's a survivor, a fighter, and the best mother I've ever seen. She saved her puppies when the world gave her every reason to give up. We can learn a lot from dogs like her. He didn't expect anything. Just wanted to honor the dog who'd brought his father back from the edge, who'd given them both a reason to wake up each morning. By the next morning, the post had 500 shares. By evening, 5,000. Someone tagged the Green Bay Press-Gazette. A reporter called Tom's phone at 8 p.m. asking for an interview. By January 7th, the post had been shared 50,000 times. The local news picked it up. Television stations began calling. Bob refused every request initially. I'm not a hero. Just did what anyone would do. Tom disagreed. But 46 people didn't do it, Dad. You did. People need to hear why. Bob finally agreed to one interview, just one, with Channel 5 News. They came to his apartment on January 10th with cameras and lights that made Sasha nervous. Bob sat on his worn couch with Sasha at his feet, Tom standing supportively nearby. The reporter, a young woman with kind eyes, asked the question everyone wanted answered. Mr. Callahan, what made you stop when 46 other people didn't? Bob took a breath. Mary had always said honesty was the only policy worth having. I almost didn't. I was having a bad day, a bad year, bad 3 years, if I'm honest. What changed your mind? Her eyes, Bob said, looking down at Sasha. She looked at me like my wife used to, like she was begging me to save her. I couldn't save my wife, but maybe I could save this dog. Your wife? Bob's hands trembled slightly. Mary died 3 years ago, cancer. We couldn't afford the pain medication at the end. I had to watch her suffer. His voice cracked. The ambulance took 47 minutes to arrive after I called 911. Mary died 12 minutes before they got there. The reporter's professional composure wavered. I'm so sorry. When Sasha barked outside my store, I looked at my watch. It was 5:47 p.m. Bob smiled sadly. And I later learned she was the 47th person she'd asked for help that day, and the address where she'd been abused, Warehouse 47. What does that number mean to you? Bob was quiet for a long moment. It means I got 47 minutes back. I got to save something this time. The interview aired that night. By morning, the video had been viewed 200,000 times. By the end of the week, 2 million. National news outlets picked it up. CNN, The Today Show, Good Morning America. The hashtag #the47thbark began trending on Twitter. Donations poured into the Green Bay Humane Society in Sasha's name. $12,000 in the first week alone. People from across the country sent letters to Bob's hardware store, sharing their own stories of loss, of almost giving up, of being saved by unexpected grace. Emily Kowalski was 62 years old, a retired social worker who now taught part-time at a local elementary school. She saw the video on January 8th and couldn't stop crying, not just because of the story itself, but because of the guilt that had been eating her alive for over 2 years. In November 2017, Emily had been a social services investigator. Someone had called in an anonymous tip about a dog in distress at Warehouse 47 on Ashland Avenue. Emily and a police officer had conducted a wellness check. Marcus Brennan had been polite, cooperative, and adamant. "I don't have any dog, never have." They'd found no evidence, no barking, no smell, no visible signs. What Emily didn't know was that Marcus had moved Sasha to a friend's garage the night before, warned by someone who'd seen officials asking questions in the neighborhood. The case was closed. Emily had suspected Marcus was lying. Something about his nervousness, the way he'd positioned himself in the doorway to prevent them from seeing deeper into the warehouse. But suspicion wasn't evidence. She'd filed her report and moved on to the next case, except she never really moved on. Every few months, she'd drive past Warehouse 47, wondering if that dog was in there, suffering while she did nothing. The guilt had contributed to her early retirement. She couldn't save them all, her supervisor had said. You did your job. But had she? Now, watching Sasha's story unfold, Emily knew she had to do something. On January 15th, she created a Facebook group called Sasha's Legacy, Green Bay Cares. The description was simple. No more Sashas, no more ignoring, no more excuses. Within 48 hours, 2,000 people had joined. Emily organized the group with the efficiency of someone who'd spent 30 years in social services. She created subcommittees, action plans, measurable goals, monthly donation drives for the Humane Society, a volunteer network to check on stray animals and report abuse, a fund to help low-income pet owners afford veterinary care, educational programs in schools about animal welfare and responsible pet ownership, a hotline, Report Animal Abuse, with trained responders available 24/7. By February, the group had 10,000 members. Emily organized the first major community event, the 47 Acts of Kindness Challenge. Participants committed to performing 47 good deeds in 47 days, helping neighbors, donating to shelters, checking on elderly residents, feeding stray animals. School children participated, businesses participated, even city council members joined. Local media covered the movement weekly. Green Bay transformed by dog story, read one headline. What had started with one man following one desperate dog was becoming something much larger, a community examining its own capacity for compassion and finding it wanting. On February 10th, Marcus Brennan was formally arrested and charged. Felony animal cruelty, Class 1 felony, up to 3.5 years in prison. Unlawful restraint of an animal, failure to provide adequate care. Additional charges pending if investigators could prove what happened to the previous dogs those mounting bolts suggested. Police found Marcus in the warehouse, drunk, surrounded by empty bottles. He didn't resist arrest, barely spoke. His booking photo showed a hollow-eyed man who looked far older than 37. His initial court appearance on February 12th was brief. His public defender entered a not guilty plea. Bail was set at $10,000. Marcus couldn't afford it. He remained in custody, and nobody came forward to help him. Not Jennifer's sister, who had custody of Lily. Not friends, he had none left. Not Helen Morrison, the woman who owned the warehouse, because she was facing her own charges. Social media exploded with reactions. Death threats flooded the police department's Facebook page. People demanded maximum sentencing. But other voices emerged too, asking uncomfortable questions. What about the property owner who knew and did nothing? What about the system that had checked on the abuse report 2 years ago and found nothing? Where was the accountability beyond just one broken man? Helen Morrison's case created the most debate. When confronted with evidence of her role, renting to Marcus for years, suspecting abuse but not reporting it because she needed the income, the 70-year-old widow made a stunning public statement. "I knew something was wrong," she said in a press conference her lawyer tried to stop. "I heard sounds. I saw Marcus's condition deteriorating, and I did nothing because I needed that rental income to survive. My husband left me the warehouse and nothing else. That $800 a month kept me fed, kept the heat on. I chose my comfort over an animal's life, and I have to live with that." Then, she did something nobody expected. "I'd like to plead guilty and serve Marcus Brennan's sentence. I'm 70 years old. I enabled this abuse for years. Let me face justice for both of us." The court rejected her offer. Each defendant had to face their own charges. But Helen's gesture sparked intense debate. She sold the warehouse and donated $50,000 to Sasha's legacy. She became the group's most active volunteer, spending 20 hours a week at the animal shelter, working with abused dogs, her penance visible and tangible. Was it genuine redemption or performative guilt? The community remained divided. Some praised her courage in taking responsibility. Others called it too little too late, a wealthy widow buying absolution while Sasha still bore the scars. Emily Kowalski wrestled with her own guilt, wondering if she should make a similar public confession about the failed wellness check in 2017. Tom encouraged his father to forgive himself for the times he'd walked past Sasha before December 29th. Forgiveness, it seemed, was more complicated than anyone wanted to admit. The trial was set for March 15, 2020. Marcus remained in jail. Green Bay remained transformed. And in apartment 4B, Bob learned that saving something broken meant accepting you might be broken too. And that was okay. March 15, 2020 dawned cold and clear. Brown County Courthouse filled early with spectators, media, and animal rights advocates wearing pins with Sasha's photo. Bob arrived with Tom and Sasha, who'd been certified as his emotional support animal. Dr. Maggie Walsh came to testify as an expert witness. Emily Kowalski sat in the gallery, carrying her own guilt like stones in her pockets. District Attorney Michelle Kowalski, Emily's daughter, though few people knew, led the prosecution. Marcus's public defender, James Walsh, looked tired before proceedings even began. The prosecution's case was devastating in its simplicity. Photographs of the warehouse room projected on screens made jurors gasp. The chain, the blood-stained concrete, the empty bowls, the other mounting bolts suggesting previous victims. Dr. Walsh's testimony was clinical and damning. "In 30 years of veterinary medicine, I've never seen systematic abuse this prolonged. This wasn't anger. This was torture." Police testified about finding Marcus drunk in the warehouse, about the evidence of other dogs, about his initial lies 2 years earlier when they'd investigated the anonymous tip. Then Bob took the stand. "When I found those puppies, they were dying," he said quietly, "because 46 people before me didn't care enough to stop, didn't want to get involved, looked the other way. We all share some guilt here. But Marcus Brennan made the choice to hurt something helpless for 3 years. That choice was his alone." Sasha lay at Bob's feet during his testimony, calm until the bailiff brought Marcus into the courtroom. Then she began shaking, whimpering, pressing herself against Bob's legs. Marcus, in an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his diminished frame, saw her. Their eyes met across 30 feet of courtroom space. Marcus's face crumpled. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. He mouthed 2 words. "I'm sorry." The jury watched. The gallery watched. Nobody knew if his remorse was genuine or performance. On day 2, the defense didn't deny the abuse. Instead, James Walsh tried to explain it. He called an expert on grief and trauma who testified about how profound loss can manifest as violence, especially in individuals with untreated mental illness and substance abuse. He presented Marcus's medical records, depression, alcoholism, suicidal ideation documented over 3 years. Financial records showed bankruptcy proceedings, medical debt totaling $89,000, a business collapsing under the weight of unpaid bills. Then he told Jennifer's story, how she'd been diagnosed with leukemia in 2017, how she'd filed for divorce claiming domestic violence that existed but was exaggerated, to ensure Marcus didn't fight for custody, didn't destroy himself trying to save her the way Bob had tried to save Mary, how she'd died alone in hospice in May 2018, 8 months after leaving, forbidden Marcus from attending her funeral. Marcus Brennan is a broken man who did terrible things, Walsh argued, but he's also a victim of a healthcare system that bankrupts families for trying to save dying loved ones, of loss so profound he couldn't process it, of mental illness left untreated because he couldn't afford help. This doesn't excuse his actions, but it explains them. Hurt people hurt people. Until we heal the hurt, we'll keep creating more Marcuses. The courtroom stirred. Bob felt the argument's pull. He'd been close to becoming Marcus himself, his gun, his plan, his own rage at losing Mary. Only Sasha's barking had stopped him. On day 3, the defense presented its surprise evidence. "Your Honor," Walsh said, "I'd like to play a video recorded by Jennifer Brennan before her death in May 2018. The prosecution objected on relevance grounds. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who'd once lost her own wife to domestic violence, looked skeptical but allowed it. The video began. Jennifer Brennan appeared on screen, filmed in what was clearly a hospice room. She was bald from chemotherapy, gaunt with an oxygen tube under her nose. Her voice was weak but determined. "To whoever sees this when Marcus needs help," she began. "My name is Jennifer Brennan. I'm recording this because I need someone to know the truth." The courtroom went absolutely silent. Jennifer explained everything. The leukemia diagnosis in 2017, the prognosis of 12 to 18 months, the decision to leave Marcus not because of his anger, though it was real and frightening, but because she'd watched what medical debt had done to families like Bob and Mary Callahan's. She'd filed for divorce claiming worse abuse than actually occurred to make sure Marcus wouldn't fight it. "I never told him about the cancer," Jennifer's voice cracked. "I just said I was leaving. He called and begged. I held firm. I thought I was saving him. I didn't realize I was destroying him." Then came the revelation that made several jurors gasp. "Lily isn't Marcus's biological daughter. She's from a relationship I had before we met. But Marcus adopted her legally when she was 2 years old. He loves her like she's his own blood, more than her biological father ever did." Jennifer's image looked directly at the camera, tears streaming. If Marcus has hurt someone, something, because of what I did, because of the choice I made, I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry. Please show mercy. He's not a monster. He's a man who lost everything and didn't know how to survive it. I took his wife. I took his daughter. I took his purpose. And I made him think it was because he wasn't good enough. That's on me. The video ended. The courtroom remained silent for a full 10 seconds. Jury members were crying. Bob was crying. Emily Kowalski sobbed in the gallery. Even the prosecutor looked shaken. Marcus had his face in his hands, shoulders heaving. The defense then presented a letter from Lily Brennan, now 12 years old, written March 10th. Her aunt, Jennifer's sister Patricia, had finally told her the truth about her mother's cancer, about Marcus not being her biological father but choosing to be her father anyway. I hate what he did to Sasha, Lily had written in careful handwriting. Animals are innocent, and what he did was really wrong. But I understand now that he lost Mom, and lost me, and lost himself. I'm not ready to see him, but I don't want him in prison forever. I want him to get help. And maybe someday I can know my dad again. On day 4, the prosecution recalled Bob for a victim impact statement. District Attorney Kowalski asked, "Mr. Callahan, you saved Sasha's life. You've cared for her for 3 months. What sentence do you think Marcus Brennan deserves?" Bob sat silent for a long moment. Everyone waited. He looked at Marcus, then at Sasha, then at the jury. 3 years ago, I watched my wife die in pain because I couldn't afford morphine. The ambulance came 47 minutes too late. I was angry. At God, at the system, at myself. I wanted to hurt something. I wanted to die. I almost did. He paused. If Sasha hadn't barked outside my store that day, I'd be dead. She saved me more than I saved her. He looked directly at Marcus. You took your pain and gave it to something that couldn't fight back. That's not okay. It'll never be okay. But I understand it. We're both broken men. The difference is, I had a dog who barked 47 times until someone listened. Bob's voice strengthened. I don't know what sentence you deserve, but I know we both deserve a chance to do better. And I know that putting you in a cage won't undo what happened to Sasha. What will help is fixing the system that broke you in the first place. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. The verdict came back unanimous, guilty on all counts. Sentencing was pronounced March 18th, 18 months in county jail, 5 years probation, mandatory mental health treatment, lifetime ban on owning animals, 500 hours community service with animal welfare organizations after release. The judge addressed Marcus directly. Mr. Brennan, you will pay for what you did, but this court also recognizes you are a product of systemic failures. We must do better as a society. Marcus was led away in handcuffs. He looked back once at Bob. No words, just profound, devastating sadness on both their faces. Bob felt no satisfaction, just grief for all the broken pieces nobody had bothered to pick up until they'd cut something innocent. April 7th, 2020, exactly 3 months and 9 days after Bob had followed a desperate dog into a flooded salvage yard, he officially adopted Sasha. The Green Bay Humane Society held a small ceremony. Tom was there. Dr. Maggie Walsh, Emily Kowalski, with several members of Sasha's legacy, local press with cameras that Sasha had learned not to fear. A reporter asked the question that had become almost ritual. Mr. Callahan, you've said Sasha saved you. Can you explain what you mean? Bob had been thinking about this moment for weeks, wondering if he had the courage. He looked at Tom, who nodded encouragement. He looked at Sasha, who sat calmly at his feet, trusting him completely now. He looked at the cameras and made a choice. December 28, 2019, I planned to kill myself. The room went silent. Cameras kept rolling. I had a gun. I'd written my will, said goodbye to everything. I was ready. Bob's voice didn't waver. Mary had taught him that truth, no matter how painful, was the only thing worth speaking. At 5:47 p.m., I heard barking outside my store. I went out to tell that dog to shut up so I could go home and die in peace. He reached down, touched Sasha's head. She leaned into his hand. Instead, she looked at me, and I remembered what it felt like to be needed. I followed her, not because I was good, but because for the first time in 3 years, something needed me to be. His voice finally cracked. If I'd killed myself that morning like I planned, those 4 puppies would be dead too. Sasha gave me a reason to wake up the next day, and the next, and every day since. Bob looked directly at the camera. I'm not a hero. I'm a man who was saved by a dog who refused to give up. If you're out there thinking about giving up, please bark 47 times if you have to. Someone will hear you. I promise someone will hear you. Tom stepped forward, put his arm around his father. And I'm a son who abandoned his father when he needed me most. Sasha brought us back together. She didn't just save 5 lives that day. She saved ours, too. The image, elderly man kneeling with his dog, son's hand on his shoulder, all of them survivors of different traumas, was captured by every camera in the room. By evening, it had been shared 200,000 times. By week's end, 3 million. The man who saved a dog that saved him became a headline. More importantly, it became a message. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline reported a 30% increase in calls from Wisconsin in the week following Bob's confession. 5 people specifically cited his story when calling. 5 lives saved because one man had been honest about his darkness. Between April 15th and May 6th, the 4 puppies found their forever homes. Faith, the strongest male, went to the Williams family. James Williams was a veteran who'd lost his leg in Afghanistan and battled PTSD. His wife Sarah and their 2 children, aged 6 and 8, wanted to teach their kids about resilience and healing. Our family understands trauma, James wrote in his application. Faith represents everything we believe, that you can survive the worst and still trust again. The children brought Faith to visit Bob's hardware store every week. Sasha's reunions with her son were joyful. They would play fight like puppies. Sasha gentle, but engaged in a way she'd never been before. Courage went to Margaret Henderson, 68, whose husband lived in a nursing home with Alzheimer's. I need a reason to keep going, she told Bob, and Courage needs someone to protect. We'll help each other survive. She brought Courage to visit her husband 3 times a week. The dog was the only thing that made Harold Henderson smile anymore. Some deep memory of an animal he'd loved decades ago surfacing through the fog. Trust was adopted by Daniel and Amy Chen, who ran a therapy dog program at Green Bay Children's Hospital. We work with kids who've experienced trauma, abuse, neglect, medical procedures that terrify them, Amy explained. Trust's background makes him uniquely suited to help. He understands fear. He understands coming back from it. Within 6 months, Trust was certified as a therapy dog, helping more than 30 children annually face their own demons. On May 6th, Dr. Maggie Walsh officially adopted Hope. I've been thinking about it since the day she came in barely alive, she admitted to Bob. Some animals touch your heart in ways you can't explain. Hope is that animal for me. Hope became the clinic's unofficial ambassador, greeting scared animals, calming them with her gentle presence. But 9 days after the adoption, Maggie asked Bob to meet her privately at the clinic. "I need to tell you something about Hope," she said, her face serious. "Something I've known since January." Bob's stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" "She has congenital heart disease, dilated cardiomyopathy. It's progressive and ultimately fatal." The words hit Bob like physical blows. "Can you treat it?" "We can manage symptoms, make her comfortable, but Bob," Maggie's voice broke slightly, "she likely has 18 to 24 months, 2 years maximum." Bob sat down heavily. "You knew this when you adopted her?" "I knew since her first week in critical care. I ran every test." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Maggie's eyes were fierce with conviction. "Because she deserved to live every day she had, not as a sick dog people pitied, but as hope. Because those 2 years will matter more than most people's lifetimes. She's going to change everything, Bob." "You'll see." Bob looked through the window at Hope playing with another dog in the clinic's yard, her tail wagging, her spirit undaunted by the failing heart inside her chest. He thought about Mary, who'd had 18 months after her diagnosis. He thought about his own life. How did any of us know how long we had? "Every day is a gift," Maggie said softly. "Some of us get 80 years. Hope gets 2. But those 2 years? Bob, she's going to teach us how to live." Bob understood then. Hope's story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And when her time came, they would use her legacy to launch the second phase of Sasha's legacy. Care for chronically and terminally ill animals. Hope's Haven, they'd call it. A place where animals with limited time could live with dignity, love, and purpose. "She'll teach us how to die with grace, too," Bob said quietly. "But first, she'll teach us how to really live." Maggie smiled through tears. "Exactly." That night, Bob held Sasha close and thought about all the ways brokenness could be transformed into beauty. About how the smallest, weakest life could have the biggest impact. About how knowing the end was coming made every moment matter more. Hope had 2 years. Bob had however long he had. Sasha had survived when she shouldn't have. Marcus was in jail, learning to live with his guilt. Tom had come home. Emily had turned her guilt into action. They were all terminal. They were all survivors. They were all, in their own ways, learning what Hope already knew, that life wasn't measured in years but in moments of meaning. December 29th, 2021, exactly 2 years after the rescue, Riverside Community Center overflowed with 200 people celebrating Sasha's legacy's 2nd anniversary. The 4 dogs, now full-grown German shepherds, reunited in the center of the room. Faith stood tall and confident beside James Williams. Courage pressed close to Margaret Henderson, who'd aged visibly but smiled more. Trust wore his therapy dog vest, calm among the crowd. And Hope, smaller than her brothers, tail wagging despite the weakness everyone could now see, stayed close to Dr. Walsh. Sasha, healthy at 70 pounds, moved among her children with gentle dignity. Emily Kowalski announced the statistics: stray animal complaints down 40%, abuse reports up 300% as people finally stopped looking away, adoptions up 150%, $470,000 raised, 47 chronically ill animals receiving care. City Council had passed Sasha's law with mandatory welfare checks and increased penalties for abuse. 2 years ago, Emily said, one dog refused to give up. Now an entire city refuses to look away. Tom spoke about second chances. A video message played from Marcus Brennan at a halfway house, his face gaunt but sober. "I'll spend my life making amends. Thank you for giving me that chance." Then came the announcement. Sasha's legacy was expanding to care for terminally ill animals. Hope's Haven, they'd call it, for animals whose time was short, but whose lives still mattered. Dr. Walsh brought hope to the stage. The small dog looked tired, but her tail wagged. Sasha came to her, touched noses with her smallest daughter. Hope licked her mother's face. Then Hope collapsed. At 7:47 p.m. in the emergency area with Bob, Tom, and Sasha present, Hope took her last breath. Sasha howled, a sound of pure grief that silenced 200 people. The room wept together. 4 years later, on April 7, 2024, Bob Callahan died at home at 9:47 a.m. He was 72. Heart disease had weakened him over months, but he'd refused hospitalization. "I want to be home," he'd said. Tom had moved in to care for him. Sasha never left his bedside. "These 5 years were the best of my life," Bob told Tom that morning. "You came back. Sasha came. I got to matter again." "You always mattered, Dad?" Bob smiled, touched Sasha's head. "Good girl. You saved me. Now it's okay." He closed his eyes. At his funeral on April 12th, Sasha walked behind the casket in her service vest. Marcus Brennan, released early for good behavior, stood in back, crying. The tombstone read, "Robert Bob Callahan, 1952 to 2024. The 47th person." He stopped. Tom adopted Sasha, who lived 3 more peaceful years before dying in her sleep in July 2027. Sasha's legacy continued, helping over 1,000 animals annually. The number 47 became Green Bay's symbol of second chances. Schools taught the 47th bark as a lesson in compassion. Marcus spoke at schools about breaking cycles of violence. Every December 29th, the city observed 47 minutes of silence for all who suffer unnoticed. In the end, Sasha taught a city what one voice, even when it's barking 47 times, can accomplish if just one person listens. Sometimes we feel invisible like Bob did, wondering if our best years are behind us, if anyone would notice if we weren't here tomorrow. We carry losses that changed us. Empty chairs at the dinner table, dreams we buried, children who moved away, friends who forgot to call. We've walked past people who needed help because we were drowning in our own pain. But here's what Sasha teaches us. It's never too late to stop, to listen, to matter again. Bob was 67 with a gun in his pocket when he chose to follow that desperate dog. He thought he was saving her. Instead, she gave him 4 more years of purpose, brought his son home, transformed an entire city. Your 47th bark might be the one someone finally hears, or you might be someone's 47th chance to be heard. Every day we wake up is another opportunity to choose connection over isolation, to let something broken save us by letting us save it back. The number 47 reminds us it's not too late. Have you ever been someone's 47th chance? Or have you needed 47 tries before someone stopped? What's your number 47 story? Share in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.